Thank you all for coming. My name is Simon Black. I'm Head of Investment Management at Dolfin, whose offices you are currently residing and enjoying and will be for the next 2 to 3 hours, depending on how we get on this evening. I'm not going to speak very much this evening, you'll be pleased to hear. I just wanted to say welcome, thank you all for coming. This is an area, and part of the reason why we were so interested in hosting it this evening was we're trying to do a lot of interaction and conversations with our clients. We're trying to understand what our clients are interested in, what they want to invest into, how they want to build exposure in their portfolios. We're trying to listen to them, and then we're trying to host interesting events where partly we're learning, partly you're learning, and we're trying to sort of follow this interest and this demand. So that's literally what I'm going to say. It's a pleasure of mine to introduce our guest of honor, Mr. Fox. Hopefully I can get all of this correct. Feel free to interrupt me if I get this wrong. 55th President of Mexico, 2000 to 2006. Prior to that, the CEO of Coca-Cola LATAM, subsequently has set up, I'm going to butcher the pronunciation because I'm going to do it with the anglicized voice of Centro Fox, the non-for-profit, and sits on the board of directors of Khiron Life Sciences. So I am going to hand over to him, and he's going to spend 10 to 15 minutes talking you through the sort of 10,000-foot view of the cannabis industry and how we could see things going forward. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias. Let me get out the light here because it gets hot. Thank you very much to your presence here. Really, it's interesting to have you around in this dialogue that we're going to hold about a very young industry, a new industry that is growing around the world quite rapidly. And let me start with this bullet, because right now when you see the graphs of these three corporations on the cannabis space, there is a fall down. Not like the London Bridge falling down. This is part of creating and building and developing a new industry. Carlos Slim, Mexican, the third most wealthy person in the world, recommends, and he sits almost every day, when markets are not that good, is the opportunity to invest. It's the best opportunity to invest. I leave you with that thought of Carlos Slim, our great businessman in Mexico. Number two, that I've been an activist on this industry for over 10 years. Right after I finished the administration, we created a think tank in Mexico by the name of Centro Fox, which is the first presidential library ever outside of United States. No other place in the world, presidents have presidential libraries. The only difference of ours with those in United States that each former president has is that we don't receive public funds like they do in United States. It's in those libraries where they keep the archives of the administration. They usually hold up to 80 million, 100 million documents that were recorded and produced throughout an administration. That's the place they keep them. In our case in Mexico, those archives are for the nation. So they're in one place, everything that corresponds to a president. But former presidents, then the time I was leading in Mexico, usually would turn into this archive place about 3 million, 4 million documents. So no transparency, no accountability. In my case, I raised it up to over 50 million documents that are kept in those archives and that are kept also a copy in our library. But anyway, through that exercise of think tank in this place, we decided that we had to jump into the arena after one single purpose, is to bring peace and harmony into Mexico because of this war on cartels and this war on drugs that is being held in Mexico since long. A war that we have not been able to control or to win, and that has put Mexico on the spot worldwide in relation to homicides, in relation to blood, in relation to kids killed out on the streets because of drugs. So we decided that we must find ways out of this trap that we have in Mexico. One way out would be if United States will legalize and United States will stop consuming illegal drugs. That would help a lot. That would be a solution, but that has not happened yet. The other one is to promote legalization throughout the world, and that's what I've been doing for 10 years. 10 years ago, my first participations on the space had to do with conferences that I would do asked by the players at that time of the industry. And yes, I did start having conferences like this, 50 people, and then moved into 100, 1,000, 3,000, 5,000, even 10,000. And so I became a player on the industry and an activist. Of course, audiences were totally different. At that time, didn't have these audiences with jacket, ties, and well-dressed and well-presented. Business community, farmers, and else. At that time, it was long horse tail, smelled to marijuana, jeans all broken up, and big beard. So that's the audiences I used to speak to. Imagine the change in this industry to be sitting here in London with relevant leaders of the money and finance industry, investment industry, to listen about the industry. There's been a paradigmatic change. Nobody has grown so fast, not even the Coca-Cola company throughout its 80 years in the marketplace, that has grown up to 200 countries where they are in the marketplace and they do profits and returns out of those markets. This industry in 5 years, has expanded itself at a higher speed than the Coca-Cola company. It's moving pretty fast. So everything is new every day. The participants in the industry are creators, are innovative people that are building up this industry day by day. There is no reference back except what I mentioned before. So all of us here are building a new industry, a new economic sector, and a new health supporter and health activist, which is this industry in support of people and people's health. So there is a reason why. There is a cause behind this industry, which is serving humankind in health needs, and that's what has made it so successful so rapidly. So medical use is the way to get into the industry safely and according to consumer needs. This is one of the reasons why it has grown so much. And this is why Khiron itself, I'm on the board of Khiron, so I'm obliged to promote, otherwise I don't get my fee. No, I do it because I'm convinced through our think tank activity that we have something new, that we have a new economic sector that is very generous, that has transformed this plant by taking it away from hands of criminals and putting this beautiful, nice plant in hands of business community, entrepreneurs, academy, researchers, farmers, and so on and on. It's incredible, this profound change that has happened and that's brought us here to sit together. We do in Central Fox a yearly event that we call Cana Mexico, which is to gather the industry and the players of the industry from around the world to get ourselves informed, to learn further than what we know about the industry, to exchange, to network, and it's been very successful. We will be running it again next March by the third time in Central Fox. Over 1,500 players of the industry come and sit down to listen what's going on. And so it's in one of this event, on the very first one, where I met Khiron. And Khiron not only is a great, fantastic, new company in hands of two millennials, two young guys from Colombia that went to school in Canada and decided to build up this company. Of course, they were not involved in the industry before. They do it with a business venture vision, but they also do it because they're convinced that we are doing good things for good people, for people that needs help and support. And that's the reason number one here, and that's why Khiron measures its success through the number of patients that we're attending, and not the kilos that we're producing of marijuana or hemp or this, which makes a difference. And that's why Khiron is becoming, and it already is, the leader company in Latin America. So we chose a space where we wanted to participate, maybe because of these two millennials, they are Colombians. And so we're working in Latin America, present most everywhere, in every market. Some markets we're already invoicing within those markets. Some others we're participating twofold. One, to work together with authorities and specifically with regulators so that we can bring our point of view about regulations. Because this industry is mostly dependent on regulations. So we have to work right from the beginning on trying to have the right regulations, the open market regulations, competitive market that we need. And so that's one action that Khiron is taking around Latin America and now in Europe. And of course, Canada and United States together with other players. And number two reason is to expand through the world, take the industry to the world, but at the same time to inform, to promote, to let the rest of the players, governments, consumers, users, people that need help, attendance, to help them throughout to understand what this revolution means all about. It's surprising every meeting we have or we hold with doctors, with hospitals, with people that is on the health space, the little they know about this plant, the little they know about this industry. I would say up to now, 95% of doctors do not prescribe or do not consult on the space of cannabis as a problem solver in the case of health. So a lot of missionary work has to be done. A lot of information has to be delivered to all these communities to put in hands in front of them information needed for decision making. Same thing with the financial world. The investment world also needs information. How long, how far, how high is this industry going to go? What are the actual conditions of the industry? What is the future of the industry? And this is why we hold this kind of meetings, and we thank the sponsors for this, to have us here together. So that's the story, and the future, I think, is bright. Specifically Mexico, a country with 130 million people, a country that is the 12th largest economy in the world, is about to be the second large economy, the second large country that will go for the whole enchilada. This meaning that will go for medical use and will go for recreational use. So Mexico, very soon in time, will become like Canada, that at national level, at federal level, both decisions are taken. You have witnessed how Canada is changing the cannabis space, how it's revolutionizing the way to go about the industry because they have approved both. United States should be taking that position, but it's not because of only local authorizations, only local regulations, only local state changes in law. The day they change federal law, things will be totally different. For sure, they will be the largest player in the world. Right now, like the horse, they are refrained by the bridles. They cannot move as fast as everybody would wish. They cannot even trade and move behind state borders or country borders. So hopefully Mexico, the new date is April. It was December because of a Supreme Court approval. Supreme Court mandate that every single Mexican as a human right should have access to these products and let them decide how they want to use it, in what amount, or what to consume. So Supreme Court ruling now forces the executive branch and forces Congress to come out with a legal framework to move ahead. The date is next April. It will happen, no other choice for executive branch or for Congress. So we'll have that new huge market moving on. And Latin America is moving, like Colombia, like Peru, like Uruguay, like Chile now, like Brazil is beginning to contemplate. Argentina pretty soon will also get into the space. So this industry is called to be a very dynamic, successful industry in the close future. To finalize my words is that we're glad to be here sitting with you to look at the future of this industry. Let's not feel that the industry has been stopped. It's just a technical matter in relation to valuation of the market with the activities in the marketplace. And yes, I insist because I come from the Coca-Cola company. There is no better business than that one that invests in assets, invest in production, invest in machinery and equipment, invest in innovation and technology, and invoices. And maybe part of the problem today we're having is that many companies are not yet invoicing. They're just going after the money from the marketplace. That's happening with Khiron. You will see the whole line of products that we have. We see those products coming into the US market for the first time. We see those products coming into Latin American markets now. And we see those products coming into Europe now before the end of the year. So we're in a hurry to invoice, to move ahead, to penetrate and participate in the marketplace like the Coca-Cola did for such a long time. Now, the future is cannabis space. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your words. You've already kind of started talking about the quantitative aspect of cannabis this year. Thank you very much. So this is an overview of the cannabis industry year to date. So as you can see, in the first 4 to 5 months of this year, cannabis stocks, the overall markets was lifted by positive news that came from the US, which lifted a century-old ban on hemp. So from this stage, we saw the market rallying 50 to 60% before reversing. A major reason for this reversion is that these companies were trading as if they were evolving in a globalized and legalized market, which was not the case. During this same period of time, we saw revenue growth in some of cannabis companies accelerating as well, which meant that we saw revenue growth and price compression, which meant that ultimately the enterprise value started shifting from being quite expensive last year. So if you look at enterprise value to sales in 2018, with 30 times sales to 29 sales, and currently they're trading at 5.3 times and 7.1 times. The reason for this is that initially, so if you look at sales from retail cannabis stores from January, February, March, during the year, we saw retail sales decreasing. This was because of a lack of actual physical retail stores in Canada, which meant that the overall retail market was undersupplied. So after this, revenue continued to grow. We saw price compression, which now means that the overall cannabis market has become a bit more affordable, and the market is also expecting the same trend next year. Something interesting as well that we've been seeing is that now US cannabis companies are actually cheaper than Canadian ones. The major reason for this is that Canadian companies still trade as if they had a global footprint. A lot of Canadian listed companies have footprints in Europe, in Australia. Some of them are starting to go in Southeast Asia. So you as an investor, if you'd go into the market and we're focusing on global footprints, you'd be paying this extra premium. So this was briefly the cannabis overview this year. Today we're joined by 3 different companies, which this is something that we mentioned at our previous meeting, is that the cannabis industry is a bit more than solely growing a plant and selling it. So the 3 different companies today are going to talk about the 3 different types of services or products that they sell and how they intend to bring it to the market in their local markets in Europe, their local market in the US and in Canada. And then we're going to discuss with them how they're planning the European transition. We're going to ask questions about how the market is evolving here in Europe, what are the differences and similarities between the US and Europe. And then we'll open the whole discussion to questions. So we will start with iAnthus. So please welcome Julius Kalcevich, the CFO of iAnthus.
Thank you. Does this work? Yep. Perfect. Thank you. So first off, just a little bit about iAnthus. I'll speak about it in 1 second. We've been a public company for about 3.5 years, and we've been a company focused on the US for about 5.5 years. And I just want to sort of set the stage in how much has changed, because when we started the company 5.5 years ago, there weren't companies like Dolfin who were hosting these types of events. It was, we were all working our Rolodex for people who were investing in the US. And it's dramatically changed over the past couple of years. Where we started, it was a couple dozen shareholders. We now have 60,000 shareholders within the company. And so thanks to guys like Dolfin who continue to sort of open their minds around broadly what this industry and the potential, whether in different jurisdictions, because it hasn't always been like this. It started in a much different way. And the other thing I want to mention is that there weren't gentlemen like President Fox years ago who are getting behind this industry or understanding the industry. We're focused on the US, and I don't have to get into US politics, but everyone knows the person who lives in the White House right now doesn't perhaps have the same open mind as someone like President Fox. But now a little bit about iAnthus. Okay, so just a little bit about our strategy, and I'll just walk through these couple slides really quick. I'll take about 5 minutes, and then we'll be passing off. But we're a vertically integrated operator within the US. And basically, it's a very straightforward strategy. As vertically integrated, the license that we have in various states in the US allows us to cultivate, it allows us to manufacture, process, and create different products, and then basically have our own retail dispensaries that we can sell these products through. And it's relatively straightforward in terms of we're building out a retail footprint. We're making sure that we're using that initial retail footprint to understand which way that the consumer wants to go. What types of products do they look like? What sort of, whether it's ailments, what are they looking to get from the products, so that we're continuing to either delight or figure out what are the next steps where we want to take our products. Lastly, continue to innovate, continue to create brands. As good as it is being a retailer, growing cannabis, what I think a lot of people are trying to do in this industry are create brands and create a loyal following. And as President Fox was saying, whether it's around Coca-Cola or otherwise, everyone understands these massive brands. And I think that's where everyone wants to go with this industry. And there's different ways of getting there, but ultimately it's creating great products and great brands that ultimately create a premium in this sector. You want to make sure that you're distributing those products, whether through your channels, whether your own retail, dispensaries through your competitors or other dispensaries that are out there. Right now in the US, there's probably 4,000 different dispensaries. Some states have a lot of them. Some states it's very, very restricted. There's only a couple dozen in some states. In Colorado, there's probably more than 1,000. But you want to make sure that you're taking these products, selling it through other outlets. And then lastly, you want to make sure that you're driving scale, you're lowering your cost of manufacturing and cultivation. But in a nutshell, that is what that's our strategy. Just a few things in terms of who we are and by the numbers. We just released our Q3. These are in US dollars. In Q3, our annualized revenue or turnover is about $120 million. From Q2, that had grown about 16%. And even from the quarter before that had grown from 20%. And that's kind of the growth that whether it's ourselves or other people in this industry are looking at, sort of quarter over quarter, 10 to 25% growth over the next couple of years. And as each state continues to change and either open their programs and continue to legalize, it's almost a built-in growth rate for operators. We've got 28 open retail stores. We have licenses for 68 different retail stores across the US. We're in 11 states. We sell our products in almost 190 different dispensaries. We have a CBD line that's in over 2,000 different stores. We have 1,000 different SKUs and products that are out there. When I helped start the company over 5 years ago, there were 4 of us. There's now over 700 of us. Once again, from a shareholder base of 60,000 different shareholders across the US, across Europe, across Canada. In terms of the US market, and I know that obviously I'm in Europe right now, so perhaps the US is perhaps not as interesting, but during Q&A, I'm happy sort of discussing some of the nuances and what I think people can expect in Europe based on the US example. But first off, in the US, even though it's not federally legal, there are a series of states where it is legal. There is pretty close to 10 states where it's fully legal. Colorado is probably the most notable. And then there's a variety of states where it's medically legal. So the dark blue states are where we have licensed marijuana operations, and then the lighter blue is where we're selling CBD. Right now, the legal market in the US between these two different markets is roughly around $12 billion. As I mentioned, we are always trying to make sure that we're setting up flagship locations in the states that we're in. That is where you start to build a brand. You're starting to create foot traffic. A lot of things in this industry are more difficult than it should be. I think a lot of people are aware banking is sometimes difficult. Advertising, marketing is difficult. One of the best ways, for instance, to create a brand, to create foot traffic, word of mouth, is through flagship retail. So you're not going to be putting up locations all across the state. That's expensive. We don't want to be just a bricks and mortar company. But if you start with retail locations that are inviting and you get people to come in, it does create word of mouth. And that is part of our strategy. And these are just some of the locations that we either have or that are in the process of building out. Atlantic City, Miami, Las Vegas, Brooklyn, Boston. In terms of brands, as I mentioned, that is, I think, what everyone is trying to focus on in terms of building different brands, and different parts of the value chain are very interesting. And I think everyone is trying to figure out where can they be a specialist in terms of building brands. In the US, we look at, for instance, just being a cultivator in the US. That's difficult for a company like us where you have to be spread across 10 or 11 different states. And as you'll hear from the guys at Khiron, we won't be able to compete with the cost of production in some of their locations. So we will cultivate while necessary, but what we are trying to do is create brands that are asked for by name. And these are just a host of some of the different brands. In terms of concentrates, we have some of the leading #1 brands in the states that we actually sell. On the CBD for life side, we've won a series of different awards for some of our products that are out there. Our market share in terms of some of these brands is anywhere from some 5 to 15%. We're going to continue to roll these out over time. As I mentioned, we also need to make sure, just given what happens in the US, you can't even cross state lines with products. So we can't grow something at a low-cost facility in Florida and then ship it into the next state like Georgia or other places. You have to have facilities in each of these states You have to make sure that you're good at doing it, but I think at some point a lot of this is going to no longer be as important to companies like us. But right now you have to make sure that you're doing it well, and we're making sure that we do address that part of the value chain. You want to control as much of your supply as possible, because that's allowing you to drive revenue, drive products, and drive innovation. So just a little bit of speaking about valuation. So ourselves on the left-hand side, and then just some of our US peers on the right-hand side. It's not necessarily just a direct comparison, but I think in a lot of cases, everyone is, you probably see from the charts, in terms of everyone's stock price charts, it has been a very difficult 4 or 5 months for roughly the industry. And I think people are trying to pick apart whether it's our business model versus other people's business model, or people who are in different jurisdictions. I think the broad message is right now, whether it's ourselves or sort of any of our peers, is that everything is on sale right now. People have looked at some of the regulatory developments, and it's taken a little bit longer in the US or in other jurisdictions, and people have just sort of like stepped back broadly from the industry. A lot of the industry's raised a lot of money, and in a lot of cases, some people haven't delivered on their promises. And again, people have stepped back because of a lot of these things. But where we are right now is a very interesting point for the market. I would also say one of the slides that Joseph had showed before, if you just look at what's happened over the last 12 months, and whether it's the past 12 months, past 24 months, every year in December, and a lot of investors are in Canada, and it's tax loss selling season. Every December, the market has dipped down, and then every January, there has been a huge upswing in the markets. This has happened for definitely the past 2 years, and even in some cases in the year before. And that's what we're in the middle of right now. But in terms of ourselves to our peers, and I think one of the, you can see that our profile, quite similar number of states, number of dispensaries. Obviously, from a valuation perspective, our view is that we're cheaper than cheaper than other people. But I think one thing for all of you guys as well to remember, that this industry is not a winner take all. There's not going to be just one cannabis company in the US. There's not going to be just one European one. Regulators will not allow it. They're typically giving out in different jurisdictions anywhere from 10 to 20 licenses in some of these different geographies. Some are a little bit different, but there is definitely room for quite a few winners that are out there. And that's just one of the things as you guys continue to evaluate broadly what's happening in the sector. So.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this. As Julius mentioned, the US market is currently fragmented, and we expect the European market to be similar in the next 3 to 5 years. Brussels so far hasn't really given any direct directives, I'd say, to every countries individually. They kind of left it to every single country to decide how they want to regulate locally the market. Up next is Tejinder Virk, president of KhironEurope. He's going to talk about to us about his company and how they're expanding into both the US and Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks again to our sponsors, Dolfin, and also President Fox, who has made this long journey to be here with us. Always a very tough act to follow, but I'll do my best. So Khiron, I think, is neatly encapsulated on this cover page of our presentation. We are a global cannabis company with core operations in Latin America. We are focused on 2 verticals, the medical and the consumer health wellness vertical. In medical, we are a leader in Latin America. Our core operation is headquartered in Bogota, Colombia, where we have a grow operation that with an extraction lab, we have pain clinics, which we will soon be selling cannabis-based medicines into. And we're also working to create a system where you can have reimbursement through insurance. We are leveraging that model across Latin America with reach into Mexico, Chile, Peru, Brazil, and we're now exporting what we can globally of the medical model, particularly into Europe with the United Kingdom. I'll talk more about that in a moment. On consumer, we have led with our cosmetics brand, or it's a cosmeceutical rather, which is Quida. We have some samples here tonight, which I hope that some of you get to try and understand some of the benefits to this cosmeceutical. The cosmeceutical is a cosmetic which has some functionality, not medical claims, but our cosmeceutical has CBD in it, and that helps with things like antioxidation, so anti-aging, as well as hydration. The team that underpins this is growing the company based on their regulatory know-how, based on the business that we've built so far, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. I like this slide because it strikes you with our near-term revenue drivers. So on the left-hand side, we have a little bit of information in terms of who we are helping in medical. And we recently announced that we are the first company to be able to sell THC medicines in Colombia. That's a huge accomplishment, and that will start in the first half of 2020. These are some of the patients that will be receiving our cannabis-based medicines that are served by our clinics, which are featured in the middle here. That's the Latin American Institute of Neurology and Neuroscience. We'll be serving indications ranging from chronic pain to epilepsy, and this is really changing the lives of people for the better. On the right-hand side, we have Quita, which we talked a little bit about, and that in itself is a leader. We talked a little bit about brands tonight. This is the first CBD skincare brand that has gone global. We have our experience in Latin America, which has been over a year. We've just launched into the United States. Our team was at a major launch event in Los Angeles last week. We've announced that we're coming to Europe by the end of the year in the United Kingdom. This is something we'll talk a little bit more about and why it's so differentiated. Medical by the numbers, our clinics serve 119,000 patients. We have identified through our educational drive 1,000 patients that are ready to receive cannabis-based medicines. And these are for neuropathic pain, epilepsy, and taking them off existing treatments, opioids, other such treatments, and introducing this. And that's something which is, I think, differentiated because the experience in Canada was slightly backwards. You had a market which opened up without education, which came much later, but we've been leading with that. We've been leading with doctor relationships, with over 3,000 doctor relationships. We are speaking to all of the major medical associations in Latin America, and we are ready now to serve that population, and that's going to be a revenue driver for Q1. Quita, moving into the cosmetics, our other side of the business, something that is worth mentioning is that we're not just another CBD topical. We've actually formulated CBD into something we call CB Derm. And CB Derm is a formulation which helps to increase the penetration of CBD into the skin, something that we formulated with a pharmaceutical partner. We can make claims around hydration, antioxidation, and it's something that we will continue to build as we provide more studies and clinical claims that we can substantiate through Colombia. A year ago, we were in 50 stores. Now we're in 300 in Colombia, and the US market is extremely vast. I think iAnthus did a great job of outlining that opportunity. In Europe, which is something that I am expressly focused on, the opportunity could be 10,000 plus stores. So we are now building our supply chain to serve this opportunity. For the short term, we will be importing product from Colombia into the United States and into Europe. And that's something which is quite an accomplishment, which speaks to our team's know-how. If you think about it, we are taking a cannabis product from Colombia and we are exporting it to the United States legally, which, given the history and the sort of prejudices or misconceptions, is really an incredible accomplishment. I think a senior member of our team, Matt Murphy, who's a former senior member of the DEA, was instrumental to doing this. And we'll talk a little bit more about how we want to bring that to Europe. We look at our expansion strategy. I touched on a little bit of the Latin American opportunity. This really underpins that Latin America is a huge region. People suffer from the same types of ailments as they do in any other country. You have a population of 620 million people, which, if you take the simplistic assumption that 1% of that population makes sense for medical cannabis. It is a huge market and something that we are really in the forefront to serve. In the UK, where I mentioned earlier that we are now pushing into the UK with medical, we just announced that we will be participating in Project 2021, which is a major push for medical cannabis in Europe. It is the first and largest medical cannabis registry that Europe has ever seen, and it will serve as a real-world evidence study that will enroll 20,000 patients in the UK. We are the exclusive Latin American provider to this study, where we will be providing cannabis extracts. This is a non-inhalation study. In that, we'll be serving indications that are really the same as those we're treating in Colombia. Again, the chronic pain, the PTSD, the epilepsy, and that's something that we're very excited about. And that will create a data set which will hopefully convince regulators to further the framework for medical cannabis in the UK. It's not as advanced as some other countries in Europe that we're focused on. Our headquarters is in Frankfurt in Germany, and Germany currently has the most advanced medical cannabis market in Europe. Currently 60 to 80,000 patients. The revenues I've seen generated from the medical cannabis market are almost 10 million euros a month. And 70% of those sales are subsidized or reimbursed by insurers and the government. So it is, that's the market that Europe can aspire to. And what we're doing in the UK, I think will help further that cause. Mexico, we've talked a little bit about, but really to reemphasize, a population of 130 million people would make it one of the biggest markets in the world for cannabis once the regulations come into place. And we are working with the government very closely through President Fox, through our head of regulatory, who incidentally wrote the regulations effectively for Colombia. So we're leveraging that connection within LATAM to position us well for the opportunities that are there, again, in medical, but also consumer health wellness. So we hope to see Quita there very soon. A little bit about the team. So President Fox and our board of directors. We also have a few other people which are definitely worth mentioning, like Deborah Rosati, who joined recently. She was a member of the board at MedRelief, which was sold to Aurora for 3.2 billion. Joe Mimran, who's kind of helps to add to the consumer DNA of the company, known for Club Monaco, Alfred Sung, and Joe Fresh. On the team, Alvaro Torres, our CEO, one of the co-founders, comes from a background which is focused on engineering and construction, built some of the biggest projects in Latin America. He brings that professional discipline and project management that is really lacking largely in the space, and really has been a fantastic steward of capital. We've raised $90 million to date, and with that, we have built an 8-ton per year flower grow facility in Colombia with an extraction lab, and we built a company of approximately 200 people. Chris Naprava, our president, is really our person who faces capital markets and has really brought our team together. Matt Murphy, I talked a little bit about, who was formerly with the DEA and has been instrumental with the United States. Europe, which is a newer element to our story, is really myself and Franziska Kauterbach, who is also in the audience here. Prior to joining Khiron, we were running operations for Canopy Growth Corp in Europe, so the market leader, and through that time we acquired quite a bit of know-how, and it was really a conscientious decision to take that know-how and apply it to Khiron. And really the opportunity and the management structure is very well positioned to move forward. Just some of the summaries. I think it's important to mention again this idea of brand. We have the only global skincare brand, and what's amazing, it's also a Colombian brand, and the sales numbers are speaking for themselves. We just released our Q3 numbers, and in Q3 the sales were the same as all of Q1 and Q2 combined, where we're growing at triple digits. We're just going to see what happens when we launch into the United States and Europe, which is very exciting. Project 2021 in medical, that's something that isn't even in analyst numbers, so there's a lot of ways that we can surprise. And then just on the management alignment, 30% of the company is insider owned. So we're all very aligned to make this happen. And I think the company's done a great job of managing dilution as well. So if you look at our numbers, we've generated solid growth through that while maintaining a fairly consistent share count. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks. So far we've seen two different types of companies, one focusing on multi-state operations in the US, looking more about branding. Here we're looking from another type of company, which is looking more on the medical and cosmeceutical, you call it?
You got it.
There we go. So once again, something that we mentioned in our initial meeting in August is that the idea we all have when we mention the word cannabis is that of a teenager or someone in a dodgy street smoking in a dark corner. But so far we've seen with these two companies that there is a lot more than this. So last, we're welcoming Everett Knight from Valens GroWorks. I mean, I'll let you talk about your company. I think it's a very interesting company. We're going a bit away from just farming. We're going into more R&D and technical side of it. So I'll let you.
Okay, I think I got this one here. Can you guys hear me? Well, maybe I'll stand over here out of the screen here. But thanks, Dolfin, for having me. I really appreciate all the due diligence you guys have done in the sector. Maybe just to start, I'll give my background and then jump in. So my background's more on your guys' side. So I was a portfolio manager, ran a small cap fund in Canada. I really saw the medicinal benefits of cannabis firsthand in my family. And I think that's train has left the station. And what you're seeing is the studies now coming around and backing this up. And this is the reason it's going through Europe. But through that process, I ended up launching the first long-only institutional cannabis mandate in Canada. From an investment standpoint, with my chief investment officer, we managed 1.6 billion under administration. Took a chance. We grew that team to 4 of us. We launched a second fund as well that did very well. I wasn't smart enough to know it was going to be legalized recreational so quick, so don't think too highly of me just yet. But what I will say is I got the opportunity to tour 100+ facilities across the globe. And it's amazing how rapid it's coming, not only in Canada, but here. And this is really just the first inning of a long-term growth industry. But for me, it was, I turned away from cultivation in Canada and really focused on cultivation in other places like Khiron. Because if you look at any kind of big company, no one's mass growing cultivation in the climate we have in Canada. And most companies, pharmaceutical companies, they don't grow their own opioids, right? They buy those are grown along the equator. Beer companies don't grow their own hops, whereas there's different parts of the value chain. And we came across extraction and kind of white label manufacturing and the IP around that. And what we saw was the high EBITDA margin that it generates, as well as the stability of EBITDA margins. So for me, yeah, I'll grab this at some point. There you go. But for me, we were attracted, so I toured 40+ extraction and white labeling companies across the US and Canada, and came across the team at Valens, who was blown away with the proprietary technology and knowledge they had in-house on the extraction space. Then I'll go through what that is and what that entails. But started out as an investor and becoming the largest investor in the fund, and then I joined about a year ago, and I'm more on the corporate development and capital market side. But Valens, today, we're the largest cannabis extraction company and white label manufacturer in Canada. So we have 425,000 kilograms of input capacity. And the unique thing about our company is we're more of a service provider. So we actually have contracts in place. So if you look at it, we have 2 to 4 year contracts that we have 240,000 kilograms of the 425 already contracted in going into 2020. So we have visibility in those revenue and EBITDA, and we have 2 to 5 year contracts on the white label side, and we actually have 8 contracts today. And really our belief is that the future of cannabis is in oil-based products. And if you look at this chart here, this is in the US, and Julius can attest to this, is 29% of the market was oil-based products in 2016. If you fast forward to 2018, it was 50-50, right? And if you look at where we think that's going, we think it's going to be 75% plus oil-based products. And that's for 2 reasons. One, I've never talked to a doctor that wants you to smoke cannabis. And 2 is because if you look at the incremental consumer coming into this industry, they're going to more convenient products. They don't want to roll a joint and roll it up. They want that easy beverage, vape pen, or edible. And I truly believe this is the future of the marketplace. But the base of all of this is extraction. So what is extraction? Extraction, you know from different industries, whether in oil and gas or canola or whatever else. It's a little different with cannabis. 5 years ago, we were using pharmaceutical equipment, and just like everything we've been learning, I think a lot of people said we're learning so much in the last 5 years, it's been customized for cannabis. But we have 140 different cannabinoids in this cannabis plant that we can actually isolate for different temperatures, pressures, and processes. And it's a lot more complicated than people think. So what happens is you actually take dry cannabis, you put it in, you come out with this crude oil substance that actually looks like mustard or it's really cheese whiz. It looks like the consistency of cheese whiz and has a lot of plant material in there. So what you do is take out all that plant material, whether it's the waxes, chlorophylls, fats, and you get to a winterized oil. And winterized oil are used in tincture bottles, capsules a lot. But the future of the market has really been in this distillate and isolate segment, where when we talk about medicinal cannabis and the consistency, you're getting a purity level where whether you're a medical patient or a recreational consumer, you can trust it. So even I talk about the input capacity on the extraction side. What everyone really should be focusing on is this distillate and isolate and the quality of it, the purity and the consistency. And I think you're going to hear a lot about that in the conversation today. So we do 5 different types of extraction. Nearest competitor is 1 to 2, and everyone's like, why do you do so many? The reason is we really work backwards for the product. So different types of extractions actually will actually go to a different product. So you always work backwards. If you want a shatter or a wax or a live resin vape pen, you got to use hydrocarbon extraction, which if you think about hydrocarbon, it's the anes, the butanes, propanes of the world. If you look at ethanol, it's high throughput. We can do 15 kilograms in 15 minutes. So very high throughput, but you can get to a very pure, very fast, low cost CBD isolate or CBD distillate. And then if you want to go to a full spectrum, has anyone heard full spectrum? Like the full spectrum? What we're learning is that different molecules in plants, whether it's terpenes or cannabinoids, interact together and create experience. So if you want a full spectrum and more of those molecules in the plant, you actually then can do that through the CO2 extraction route. So the reason we have so many is we need flexibility for our customers. We have 10 different customers, 5 of them being some of the biggest companies in the world, whether it's Canopy, Tilray, Hexo, Organigram, Sundial. What we need to do is the consumer trends are always changing. What we can do with our platform is always change that for them. When it takes a lot of this to build in-house hydrocarbon, you really need a bomb-proof room. It took us 2 years to get licensing. You need reinforced concrete. You need fire suppression systems, et cetera. A lot of our customers don't want to put this in their $200 million facility. And that's where we come in, because this is what we focus on every single day. So this is that customer list I was talking about. So I'll say what we've been doing is moving a lot of our customers from the extraction side into the white label and getting further integrated in that process. And what we've been looking at in the last 2 years is really investing in IP. And I'll get into one example of that IP, because the future of cannabis is how we consume it in a convenient way. And that's what we want to offer to our customers. So our customers, whether they chose to focus on one thing, maybe they focus on beverage and we're going to be doing their edibles line, or they wanted to focus on vape pens and we're doing something else. We're a complement to their platform. But what we've done is we just had 10 contracts for extraction. I think when I saw Julius a year ago, actually. And now we have 5 different of our customers kind of go in that middle white label bucket, so further integrating. And then we've gotten 3 kind of white label agreements for 2 to 5 years. And the one I'll mention, because I don't know if I have enough time to go through all of them, is Shoppers. So Shoppers is really the CVS of Canada. It was a huge validation to us to get this on our platform, but we have a 3-year agreement with them where we're making a full variety of products on their platform, and we're the sole provider for them. But all these contracts have visibility. So if you look at Burnt, 2 years, $50 million contracts, take or pay, we're going to do 2.2 million vape pens for them. Iconic, which really makes the White Claw of Canada. They're one of the fastest independent alcohol companies based in Toronto. We're going to do 2.5 million beverages over a 5-year period, take or pay. So it's getting that consistency in revenue and EBITDA for our shareholders. So one thing I want to mention, especially in Europe, is testing. So this isn't as sexy as the extraction side, but what I will say is it's more important. So if you look at today, we have a problem with testing globally for cannabis. You send 1 different sample to 2 different labs, and one says it's 17% THC, the other says it's 14% THC. Whether you're a patient or a consumer, what are you supposed to believe, right? And we need to get consistency there. We were the first ISO 17025 accredited lab in Canada, and that's just a lot of numbers saying it's the highest standard for the cannabis matrix from a methodology standpoint. And we teamed up with Thermo Fisher Scientific. the largest analytical testing company in the world, and they named us the Center of Excellence for Plant-Based Science. We're actually creating this consistency now so that you can actually get that consistent test result each and every time, whether you're a consumer or a patient. What I will say is this is another issue because we've gotten product from different producers, and in Canada, it's mandated by Health Canada to have independent pesticide testing. So we get it, and the certificate of analysis said it's completely okay. But when we actually, they tested the best batch in that acre, and then when we actually do random samples, we find a coli pesticide. We don't want our consumers to get that or our customers to get that. We can't contaminate our equipment. We ship that right back. This is an area that's underutilized today, and I think as we build it out in Europe, this is probably one of the most important cornerstones. So this is a formulation. So this is what I'm talking about, convenience and really the future. So if you think about a cannabis-infused beverage today, if you kind of put water in a glass and you think about oil, it'll float to the top. You can mix it around, but oil separates from water. This technology, we found a company in Washington. We looked at 80 different one of these. The unique thing they do is they made it water compatible. And the difference of our technology versus anything else is that it's consistent with every sip. So the first sip is the same dose as the last sip. And we have shelf stability studies of the longest in the industry that we know of 2 years. So now shoppers can trust that. Everyone can trust that on the shelf and actually leave that. And it doesn't separate, because in California right now, it separates and then you have one sip and it's called the red ring of death and you get 100 milligrams and that's a big dose, right? So this is that consistency. And the biggest thing is onset and offset from a convenience standpoint. Right now, if you have an edible or cannabis-infused beverage, you have to wait 30 minutes to 2 hours to feel the high, right? And it lasts for 4 to 8 hours. Some people have said it lasts for days. And with this technology, we can speed that up to 5 to 15 minutes, and it starts to go away in 45 minutes to 2 hours. So what does that remind you of? It reminds you of a pint, right? It reminds you of a beer. It reminds you of a glass of wine. And why do beer companies sell beer in six-pack? Well, not only because they want to make more money, but because it's social, right? And that's the key of integrating cannabis in our society, is with future technologies like this. And it's one of the most popular ones on our shelf for the cannabis space. So kind of in the final 2 slides here, today, I don't think that chart kind of grew up, but we're the most profitable company in the cannabis space today. So we did $16.5 million in revenue last quarter. We did $9.8 million in EBITDA, which we had greater EBITDA than we did revenue in the previous quarter, which as a PM background, I've never seen that in the company. We did $5.9 million in net income. So that's non-adjusted, it's putting money back in the bank. If you look at, we have 60 million plus in cash on the balance sheet. We are now cash flow positive. And if you look at the analyst estimates in the space, and we mentioned the pullback, but today, if you look at the revenue that's kind of generated in 2020, that 172 million, there's 240,000 kilograms we've contracted for 2020. If you assume 50% cannabis and 50% hemp, which we think is a great assumption, you get $145 million in contracted extraction revenue. And that doesn't include any of those white label revenue. So analysts kind of view this as like contracted revenue overall. And we're trading at 4 times EBITDA. And I think what you're seeing in this turndown is that there's a lot of opportunities to get back in the space. As President Fox said at the very beginning, this space is a long-term industry and fundamentals will matter. And there's going to be companies like the today that'll kind of step forward and differentiate themselves because correlations have been so high. And I think this is a great thing. Although it is a shakeout, I think it's a great thing for the industry. Last thing, and I'll finish up. So this is what we benchmark. There's a whole bunch of other companies in the space. I will say this is a fantastic sector to be in. I think extraction is one of the most interesting sectors overall. But if you look at where we are, we have the most toll processing contracts. We have the most white label contracts. We have the biggest annual capacity in Canada. We have the most differentiated platform of extraction types, which is very important to our model. We have the only ISO accredited lab and organic certification for extraction. So I think that's going to become more and more important as we push this forward. And if you look at, I did include cash flow from operations because it's a big differentiator in net income. And the one thing maybe that doesn't add up on this chart is just that enterprise value. And that's the reason kind of we're here telling the story today. So I think I'll end there and I can save the rest for questions later on. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm very sorry, Julius. Everyone presented themselves, but you didn't have the opportunity to do it. So I'll introduce you to everyone. So you have over 15 years of experience in corporate finance and strategic consulting. Previously to joining iAnthus, you were a partner at BG Partners in Toronto, Canada, and you're responsible for planning structuring, monitoring corporate finance transactions for your firm. Previously to this, you're also Director of Investment Banking for CIBC, and also you were working for Oppenheimer in Toronto and New York. Between 2005 and 2012, you've completed over 20 transactions representing approximately 4 billion in added value for your companies. So moving forward, we're gonna go forward with the panel discussion. I don't know if you want to sit here or come here. Yeah, maybe come. After you.
Sorry, you got me straight with this. I'll take it.
Yeah, exactly. So, Tejinder, I'll actually start with you today. As you've just launched your Quida product in America, and you're planning to doing the same in Europe, what are the main differences and similarities that you can see between these two areas?
Sure. So I think one of the main similarities is that there's a lot of interest from consumers in CBD. I think a lot of the information that people get about cannabis or CBD products is word of mouth. It's through the internet, personal research, and so there's interest there. The other similarity is also the fact that the consistency of the product is very inconsistent in both the US and Europe. So quality varies widely. Products don't necessarily have really relevant amounts of CBD in them. Testing is poor. I think some of the things that we touched on earlier tonight. And so I think for Khiron, it was important to establish a very high quality product. All of our ingredients are sourced from Europe. Our cosmeceutical is produced to the highest standards in Colombia. It's actually been certified by INVIMA, which is the health regulator of Colombia. They're a level 4 health regulator, which puts them on the same par as Health Canada. And that's going to some extent to prove that we're doing things right. And so we wanted to satisfy that demand with a product that led with quality, and also a product that led with education and claims that we could substantiate. So I talked a bit about the idea of hydration and antioxidation. Now, if we talk about regulations, this is a really interesting point. So I'll make a very high level comment that if we divide sort of CBD products into 2 categories, maybe you can divide it into 3. You have ingestibles, topicals, and let's call the last one inhalation. The ingestibles category is a tricky one. The FDA is very involved in the United States. In Europe, we have something called novel foods. That's something we're not dealing with. With topicals, there's maybe a less stringent path, but also you need to know what you're doing. You need to know how to actually find the right regulatory path. And that's something that we've been able to negotiate both in the United States and in Europe. It involves really speaking to regulators. We touched on the United States, where we have Matt Murphy, who is a former senior DEA agent. In Europe, we have our team with Francis Karabach, who is someone who was a leader in steering regulations in Europe, and has met with the EU in Brussels regularly, or the EC, I should say. And so that's something that we have focused on for the time being.
Thank you. I'll move on to you, Julius. Sure. As a leading multi-state operator in the US, you've mentioned that it's very complicated, for example, to grow cannabis in one state and then transport it to the other one. In this sense, you're working in a fragmented environment. Do you think that a similar business model has to be exported to Europe, or is Europe going to be slightly different?
It's I think there is a few lessons learned. I think what people have seen in the U.S. today, and one of the biggest drivers in the U.S. is first off, I think it's around safety. It's around transparency into the products that are being generated. That's obviously a huge driver. And then in a different way, it's from a tax revenue perspective. And that has been a massive, massive driver in the US. suggest that, and this is what is driving a lot of legalization. And I know that for a lot of people who look at this industry and are trying to push it forward in terms of a lot of the medical benefits, unfortunately, a lot of the regulators in some of these states, that's not top of mind. It's around tax revenue. And that's going to be one of the interesting things to see how different jurisdictions around the globe, not that all politicians are the same or all regulators are the same, but I think that's one of the things that people should sort of keep in mind, that they're looking to preserve or sort of create tax revenues. And again, that's a tough pill to swallow for a lot of people, but that has been a tremendous driver. And I think that that's one of the things that people should continue to evaluate. I think just generally is people look at sort of the sort of US example as it perhaps moves over. And I think one of the other things, and as we look at the US, there's 50 different states. And there is a huge, huge difference, obviously, in some of those states. You have on one side, you have a state like Utah, where you can't even buy alcohol in basically the state. And then you have where our head office is New York City or places like Las Vegas, and that is the polar opposite. And so you're going to see, and I think you'll see that as well, different parts of Europe, you'll see that there is different sort of demands, there's different regulators that have different views. And because of a lot of these different differences in jurisdictions, it slows down sometimes the process as people are gaining consensus. I've seen a lot of things in the past couple of years in this industry. A lot of stuff can move incredibly quickly. Sometimes on the political or regulatory side, stuff it can take its time.
So is this the main hurdles then from your perspective in the US is mainly regulatory coming from politicians?
Yeah, it's definitely that. And I don't know what the other gentlemen on the panel, sometimes their view of regulations. In the US, the regulatory environment that we are always watching the most of or the most concerned about, it's not at the federal level. It's not what the president is going to do, even though it's fantastic if it becomes fully legal in the US. What is the most interesting and the most important for us is what the regulations look like at the local level. Because that is where you want to open a store, or that is where you want to zone some of your cultivation. And if all of a sudden you were perhaps one of only 2 stores in a city, all of a sudden the local regulator says, we want more tax revenue, there's allowed to be 100 there. That obviously changes things for companies like us. Or if all of a sudden a city says, we don't want to have any operations within the city. So we're always focused more so on the local regulations, because that's what really drives the business. Federal legalization in the US will be a fantastic thing when it happens. I think that all of our stock prices will probably double the day it happens. I hope our stock's at $10, not at $2, because the double from 10 upwards is a lot nicer than 2 upwards. But I think that there's going to be things happening at the federal level at some point. It will take time, but I think everyone's watching what's happening more at the local or at the state level.
Okay, thanks. Question for you, Everett, sorry. You've mentioned that you've seen the market shift from flower to oil in less than 2 years. Do you think that, let's say in Europe, you'd get similar legislation in the next 3 to 5 years? Do you think it will take this amount of time for consumers to shift from flower to oil? Or do you think that this idea and this desire to go to different consumption methods will go straight away to Europe?
So it's a tough question to answer for all of Europe, because every place is so different. And Julius has a tough job because every state is like every state in Europe almost, right? And you kind of come, or every country in Europe. So everyone will be different. But what I will say here overall, we're going to have to define medical more and have the research behind medical more. And I think everyone's kind of seeing that it has to be research driven. And if we look at Canada, really the medicinal market being there and the patient growth we had changed social acceptance. So we had patients grow to over 360,000 patients in Canada, and everyone's like, wow, this is being used everywhere. And I think you said 1% of all population kind of using medicinal cannabis. I think it even could be higher. I think you're being conservative and being nice on that, because I think it could be a massive market. And once that kind of social acceptance of the medical market happens, that's when you get recreational. But since we're so kind of focused on medical here in Europe, I think what you're going to see is oil-based products are going to be more important at the start, just because that's what's going to be available. I think that you're already seeing that happen in the legalization of these countries, and even the ones that are close, whether it's Luxembourg and other ones, if you look at what they're talking about, it is oil-based products. So I think we just do that. I think there's always a market for dry cannabis, like the high quality dry cannabis. And as a consumer, different people prefer different things, right? And I think there's always a market for that, but I think day one, it's going to be more important.
Okay, thank you very much. What trends do you see from this on the extraction side regarding CBD, THC, medical, recreational? What are trends that you've noticed in the past 6 to 12 months?
Yeah, I think the consistency is more important. So everyone talks about extraction, but it's really so much more than that. Like extraction equipment is really just the front end, as I showed in your chart. I think the most important as an industry we need to revolutionize is distillation and isolation. So getting that distillate and isolate. And the reason is so if you look at a distillate, it's like 85% plus pure THC or CBD. So you have that consistently. And then you get isolates, and we're getting isolates now 99.9%. And you can actually get that consistency and trust, right? And there's nothing else in it. So when you look at medical especially, I think that's going to be more important from a technology standpoint in Europe in general. And even as a dosing standpoint with testing, I think being a little bit more strict here than even in Canada, we had one more strict in testing kind of regulations. I think that's going to be particularly important with consistency.
Okay. This is quite interesting when you talk about having consistency, particularly when you start developing a product like the one you're starting to develop. How is the acceptance do you see from either clients or when you focus around education with your doctors or your customers? What are the different trends do you see on this side, and how accepting are they when they hear medical cannabis?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think there's undeniable therapeutic value in medical cannabis. Now, I think the tricky part is that the plant has been under prohibition for the better part of 100 years. And research is just starting to emerge that is substantiating some of these claims that we can make. GW Pharma is a great example of a company that's led this approach where they've gone through the rigor of FDA trials, phase 1, 2, 3, to bring an approved drug. These are narrow indications though, and the cannabis plant is it's a tricky topic because there are well over 110 active pharmaceutical ingredients in the cannabis plant, APIs. That doesn't necessarily lend itself well to the clinical trial model that the FDA or the EMA would look at. So we need to do these bigger studies, the real world studies, where we see patient outcomes similar to 2021. We hope to see the same things in our clinic in Colombia. That will actually mirror the outcomes that have been evidenced in Canada, Australia, Germany. So that's something that you need to kind of cite. But for doctors, it'll just take more and more of this research to be generated. So time will help.
Okay. I'll come back to you, Julius. So all these states, so there's 11 states now where cannabis is legal on a recreational basis. Some have been legalized for more than 10 years. Some have just literally been legalized. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Illinois is going legal in January.
Yes.
What are the different trends that you can tell us as an investor in Europe when you're looking at a market which has been evolving for 10 years compared to another one in 1 year and one that's going to about to go legal?
Yes, it's interesting because a lot of these, all these different states, they've almost followed the exact same path. And Everett made some of these points already that typically when it starts in a state, people aren't necessarily, it starts on a medical basis. And there's very restricted products. People don't, especially when it's medical, people aren't doctors aren't encouraging people to smoke. So it's a restricted sort of product set. It's harder to get a card. to be able to order something or to go into a dispensary. Almost every state started like that. And what has then happened is that regulators have figured out the sky is not falling. Driving accidents hasn't gone up. There's not more hospital visits. And then a year or two after these programs have started on the medical basis, they start to be liberalized and opened up. And then you start to get sort of broader consensus in terms of just general voters or politicians that are more comfortable with it. And they continue to liberalize and legalize the program. But in almost every single case, it doesn't happen overnight. In the case of, for instance, California, it was the first medical state, and that was 22 years ago. It took almost 18 or 19 years to then become legal. That's the longest gap. You look in some other states, there's some that are a little bit more fast moving, like Nevada, where Las Vegas is. Who would ever think that they can be play fast and loose in Las Vegas? But there are certain states like that where it can be medically legal and then it quickly becomes recreationally legal. So I think you're starting to see it all happen faster. But it's almost typically you have to make sure that the medical community gets behind it. I also think that from a zoning perspective, where you're able to have cultivation facilities, we've tried to always build obviously according to code, but you're just never quite sure how certain things as they get built, what's going to be some of the ramifications. One of our facilities, there was a neighbor about a quarter mile, and they complained about the smell from one of the facilities. Well, you got to revent things and stuff like that. But these are real life concerns around everything, and regulators want to be cautious and move things forward. And I think that's going to be exactly what Europe is going to see. I think it's going to be that same sort of pathway forward.
I had another interesting trend when you look at how what happens with underage consumption in states where cannabis has been legalized. Interestingly enough, you see underage consumption drop quite rapidly in 3 to 5 years. So I think that's another positive, hopefully, trend that we'll see in the next 3 to 5 years in Europe. Which country is the most exciting in Europe, Tej?
Oh, controversial. Look, if we were to look at the established market, that would be Germany. Germany was a leader in medical cannabis regulations starting in spring of 2017 when they passed the cannabis laws, and there's a fantastic story behind that. But I think they have really shown where this market can go. You have the ability for doctors to prescribe on fairly open indication. You have fairly broad-based availability. It's still an undersupplied market, but you have distribution in thousands of pharmacies. And it really follows a system similar to what people would consider more like pharmaceuticals, even though it is still dry flower that you would smoke or vaporize. I think what will be exciting in Germany will be the introduction of more extracts and oils. So something that Everett has touched on. It's still kind of a cumbersome formulation. So the way that you can get oils in a medical basis in Germany is it's not perfect, but that could be smoothed out, and the regulator seems to have interest. But so that's exciting from a market growth perspective. So to already grow a market which has grown considerably in the last 3 years, and then beyond that, I think there are some markets which are very promising, like the United Kingdom, which is where we're focusing our efforts. Project 2021 is something which should hopefully start to bring doctors on side, regulators on side, to understanding the therapeutic benefits and give them the freedom to really prescribe without the sense of dread or liability, which the current sort of system in the UK sort of forces you into, because cannabis medicines here are medical specials and you can prescribe to limited patients. The study actually gives freedom to kind of go above that cap and get patients access.
Thank you very much.
No worries.
One question for you, Everett. Do you think that extraction facility can be something that will be a sort of monopoly? For example, you have a lot of leading companies globally in Canada and North America. Do you think that this can be exported to Europe, for example, or ultimately you'll start having cannabis shipped to your facilities and then the oil then being shipped back to Europe, for example?
Yeah, I think that it's, it's today versus 5 years in the future, and Tej will probably touch on this as well. Right now, if you look at Canada in general, we're exporting around the globe right now. But what we're not allowing is imports. We're actually breaking 3 federal treaties where we've really gone the anti-globalization route. And this has been an investment thesis for a while with the US doing with what they're doing. And as Europe goes further, and as we actually roll out cannabis regulations across every country, what we need to do is open up those borders, right? And I think that's a very important step for the entire industry, and it would make us more efficient. Or else in every country, we're gonna build cultivation, and then they're gonna open it up, and then all those cultivations are gonna go somewhere else. And you're gonna start having to rebuild, and we should do it right the first time. So how I view the kind of industry going is that in Canada, we grew cannabis because we had to at the beginning. But if you look at a $250 million greenhouse that's built in Canada, I've been to Colombia twice, and we were in Colombia kind of just over the summer. And for $250,000 rather than $250 million, you're growing the same quality cannabis. There's 12 hours of sunlight, it's the right elevation, so there's no really pests. There's big differences, and long term, if you look at any other industry, it's going to do that. So for us, when we look at that, we would rather have an extraction hub in that area and then send it to a finishing facility in Europe or in Canada to make those higher value added products. But today we can't do it. So you have to be more strategic and kind of doing in kind of different kind of countries and make sure you are investing your capital right, and maybe smaller size checks because you don't know where it's going to be in 5 years. But that's my challenge to the entire industry, is we need to start thinking about that, because people want to keep the profits in, but let's do it more, and it'll bring more profits into the country overall, because there'll be better products and the consumer and patient will be in better hands.
Thank you. Talking about opening up, I think it's the right time to ask if anyone has any questions in the room.
I have a microphone, so is it working?
No.
It's not working.
Thank you. I'm just investor, not participating in any production in any company. And for last 2 or 3 years, I am interested, like just for interest in this business. And I was receiving a lot of emails about time to start to invest first in Canada, then in States. The first time heard about Mexico. It's interesting development. And recently, just 3 days ago or something, I received a couple of emails. And if you don't mind, because of my knowledge and experience, I will read just a couple of things from these emails. Marijuana meltdown, the next chapter for cannabis investors. The marijuana meltdown, the lesson of the failing safe. The port stock volume is down. It was explained as well. Then financing activity is dying up. So hedge funds and others not invest. Major junior cannabis companies are being hit hard. The eco phase, the next chapter. What is eco phase? It's a new phase in investment. This is starting top, down, and then eco. That's it. Today they're saying this is in eco space. Frankly, I don't know. I just reading. Yeah? But all this interesting, and then we are coming to interesting thing. It's time to invest because everything done, and next year Trump may approve the new legislation on federal basis, because election is coming. If he would stay till this time, he would be interested to develop for farmers and others, and so on. Good sign. Another thing,
Sorry, can I ask you to formulate the question?
Yeah, what is your question?
another question will be to all of them.
Okay.
How to get Kennedy rich from the end of pot prohibition, and they're comparing the end of prohibition like it was in 1929 and so on. But at the end the same, I have the companies, small companies, stocks that can do 300%, 400% and so on if you invest in proper time. And then as usual, subscribe to my every week letter or something, $49. Then the question is, why you're advertising such a good profit for this? And the question is, what shares in your opinion now are most interesting if you talk to buy or buy too little? And another one, you haven't told about big competitors, tobacco companies, biochemicals, and pharmaceuticals. And of course, about fintech or something, there is a time to IPO or M&A. What about this? Otherwise, it was too rosy, you know.
No,
Interesting to see
there's
something
a lot in there. Thanks for laying out all the possible topics. Maybe I'll start just to summarize a couple of points. So we've seen a run up and decline in the stocks, and you could say that maybe there was a over exuberance in the sector. With any new sector, and we can point to the .com as an analog. You have run ups and excitement, and there are good actors and bad actors. And this is a time in the market where you as investors need to separate who is real and who isn't. And I think all of us would be able to talk to our individual companies and our business plans and why we are well poised at this time to be able to capitalize from this pullback in the cycle. With regards to where we go next and legalization, I think it's hard to pinpoint exactly when we'll see some of these catalysts, but I think that the direction of regulatory movement has been to open the market. And what's different from maybe the cannabis market versus the .com market is that I think when Amazon came public and in the late 90s, I think there was a hope strategy where you hoped people would put their credit card in the internet and buy everything that they want to buy. Eventually we did, it just happened 20 years later. In cannabis, there is already a market there. So there is a $200 billion market, and that might be conservative. And that is gradually coming into the light. So there's a business there, there's a consumer there, whether that is in the medical side or the recreational side. And I think the companies that are sort of at this juncture in the cycle that are capitalized can be really interesting.
I just want to add maybe one or two things on some of those points. And I think it has to do with, first off, some of the run up of stocks and perhaps some of how they've come down. And I think that, and the reason I know that we're all with the companies that we're with is because you believe in how big this sector is. And you see it, whether it's by the numbers that are up there on the screen, you can believe those numbers. I'll just give one little quick example. In Massachusetts, this is a town there's a town probably 2.5 hours from Boston. It was one of the first dispensaries that had opened within the state. For the first couple weeks, they were doing this first dispensary, and then there were others starting to open. They were doing about $1.5 million of revenue just out of this one storefront. And that, when we were talking about Germany, this is basically doing almost what Germany, the entire country of Germany, is being sold out of a town that has 10, 11, 12,000 people. I think everyone can see that people have been using this product, using this plant for hundreds or thousands of years. You look in the US, people have risked going to jail and all sorts of other horrible in terms of around crime and sort of jail time in order to pursue this product. I think everyone believes in how big it is. And I think one of the things that a lot of companies have gotten caught up in is that they've tried to expand too quickly. And not everyone has some of the costs of growing in Colombia or building in Colombia building stuff in the US, building in Canada, it can be expensive. And I think that people sometimes get ahead of themselves. And then there is a little bit of a pullback, and there's a little less money that is available to these companies to generally build stuff out. So that's just another sort of.
And maybe just final comment, like there's now 412 public cannabis or companies indirectly or directly involved in the space globally, right? We've had this, everyone wanted to get into cannabis, and there's different fundamentals in every single one of those companies. Some maybe not as many fundamentals now, and they're looking for a long term, right? And as an investor, what you're seeing in that meltdown is that they're now saying, okay, we are going to have bankruptcies. We are going to have people that didn't have good business models. And I think as an investor, what you have to do is be more selective, right? And I would seek an expert like Joseph or someone like that, because you need someone on that every day, because we're all going to have cash flow. It's all going to have to be on EBITDA someday. And I think what you're going to see is a differentiation, and the whole industry has been so correlated. If Canopy and Aurora up, everything else is up. It doesn't make sense why the US is up when Canada's up. It doesn't make any sense. But what you're going to see now, and I think 2020 is the year of differentiation, where this changes, and you're going to have to be just more selective. And to your last question, I think it's inevitable for beer companies, tobacco companies, and alcohol companies, or other pharmaceutical companies to get in the space. And you're already seeing it, whether it's Constellations, it's Molson, right? It's Heineken. You're AB InBev, right? You're seeing tobacco come in. You're seeing it. I think it just takes time, and it's how their strategy. Maybe they don't invest $4 billion, but I think there's a great platform here. And as we prove it out, I think it's a great opportunity.
Actually, we are running out of time, so we're just going to take two, but very, very quick questions.
Thank you. Thanks for a fantastic presentation. So for the optimistic people out there, let's say the industry goes to blue sky scenario in the next foreseeable future, 5-10 years, where do you see to all of you, the panelists, where do you see the most value sits in the whole value chain? Is it on the sort of supply manufacturing side, because it's a constraint of where you can do that, or towards the end consumer side, who can make it most convenient, easy to understand product, or in the middle somewhere of the platformization of that? Example would be, Apple phone was very late into the whole mobile space, but they command the most value and most margin despite 100 countries collaborate on the manufacturing side.
I can give a little bit of perspective, and then obviously you guys will have a view. I think that when you look how big these numbers are for how big the industry is, whoever is going to make it in this industry it's going to be the same as any other industry. You have to be one of the best in that specific part of it. So whether it's on the extraction side, you got to be one of the top 3 or 4 people. It's not just going to be one out there, but there's going to be a few, but you got to be the best. There could be hundreds, you got to be the best. Or whether it's on the brand side or on the cultivation side, there are, we specifically don't want to be a cultivator. However, there are a lot of people who, for instance, cultivate corn or who have done extremely, extremely well. And I think you just have to make sure that whichever specific part of the industry that you're in, whether it's websites like Leafly, which are directional and saying, hey, where to find the your dispensary, you got to be the best at that, or you got to be at the best in each little silo. And I think that's what you're going to start seeing. To Everett's point, there's going to be differentiation. I think everyone has to make money, but you got to start showing you're one of those top players in whichever vertical. And I think you're going to see 5-10 years from now, there's going to be a whole host of sort of successful companies, but they're not all going to look the same. They're all going to be in sort of different parts of it.
So I would completely agree with Julius's comments on investing in the leaders within each section of the value chain. I would add on a very long-term basis thinking that brands matter. We have President Fox, who was an alumni of the Coca-Cola company, who would be able to attest to brand, owning the formulation, and being able to take that and scale it. And if you look at the other massive consumer packaged good companies in the world, L'Oreal, Procter & Gamble. I mean, these are multi-$100 billion market caps. And cannabis has the potential to touch every single category that they play in. So brands matter.
Yeah, I fully agree with both Julius and Tej. I think that it's going to be different for every country. In the US, you have great brands like MPX, right? You actually can brand. Canada, you have this big label that says, oh, by the way, you're going to die, right? Like if you consume this product, it really looks like tobacco. I don't know if you've seen it, huge yellow label. It's tougher to brand, right? So then it's more about the IP and experience. And as Julius said, it's more about those websites. Then you're hearing about it from someone where we can't actually in Canada say this helps you sleep. But on this website, all these 5,000 consumers said that it helps you sleep, so I'm going to use this one, right? So it's going to be different, and we just don't know how that's going to play out in Europe. I think from a business case, brands rule everything in the end, right? So from brands dominant market share, so I totally agree. It's just how long do we get to global brands, and when do we get there? And is it 5 years? Is it 10 years? Is it 20 years? I think it's different for every country. So I would say invest in the best in each category.
Yeah, just a quick one.
And 45 seconds per response.
Yeah, so there was a lot of chat about brands, and I just wonder if, from a recreational perspective, it's quite an anti-establishment product. And so the idea that a medicinal company is making a recreational drug probably wouldn't go well as a regular brand, you know. And I wonder if that has been accounted for in some of the presentation already. I wonder if there should be two different verticals. I know that in Amsterdam, for example, you can get edibles, and people like the idea that I'm not going to go to Bulldog because it's just some place that every tourist goes to. I want a more sincere, genuine product. And I just wonder if that's been accounted for.
Yeah, so I would agree with your sort of line of questioning that it's difficult to do many different verticals really well. So it's hard to be a recreational player and a medical player. And I think cannabis is something special though, where there is a lot of pharmaceutical science behind it. And it's early enough where you can differentiate yourself by leveraging what you're learning in medical in consumer. But longer term, there will be specialists. There will be those that are really focused on the different consumer segments, and medical will be medical, and it will probably go down the line of approved drugs, similar to what we talked about with GW Pharma. So I agree, there'll be a branching out. But for now, and I can speak on behalf of Khiron Life Sciences, I mean, we're not doing full-blown recreational flower and whatnot. We have our medical medicinal preparations, and we have our topicals, and we're leveraging the research across both.
One other just quick thing to add, and I think it's human nature. People want choice and they want diversity. We see it, we have about 30 dispensaries open. Each state is slightly different. The products that we sell, price points are different. It is just like everyone's outfit in here. People want to come and buy something that's inexpensive sometimes. Some people want premium products. They want it in all sorts of different either flavors or varieties. I think for anyone who is ultimately going to be successful, we know consumers and patients like choice. They also like consistency and they like good value for their money, but they want choice. And
it's quite a unique demographic in that for the first time you've got a kind of an educated group of young people who are recreationally interested.
Yep.
And completely separating it from the medicinal side. These people are now more in tune with capitalism and an anti-capitalist movement, and the very idea that something that they believe that they've grown up with is now being produced on a mass scale by a big global company is probably not something that they're going to.
It's actually no. It's a great perspective, and I think that we do see a lot of that in some of our retail, sort of our retail locations that. But I think one of the guiding principles, though, especially with millennials or younger people, it's not necessarily, is it owned by a big company? They want to see something that is grown organically, it's good for the body. That actually takes precedence. And then I look at people like my father, in some cases at 69, and he still wants to have something or try something in different ways. It is a massive spectrum of potential customers, and you cannot service those age groups unless you have a huge variety of products. No one wants to walk into a dispensary and have it feel like a Soviet era commissary where there's 2 products on the shelf and there's like only a few, like you're being something forced on you. I think people want variety, they want choice. And I think that every company like ourselves, we have to enable what consumers actually want. So.
Yeah. Sorry. Oh no, I was just going to say, I agree. I mean, there's craft beer companies, right? There's different things that grow up, and now everyone wants craft, and now all the big guys are buying the craft company. I think that there's just going to be different brands on the marketplace. The bottom line is, if I'm part of that generation, and would I rather go across the street in a regulated store and buy it and make sure it has no pesticides in it, and trust the source and it's consistent, or would I rather go in the alley back door and try to buy it from my drug dealer that I've been buying it from? I think that'll dominate. I'm not saying I did that, but I think everyone's going to walk across the street. At least most people will. So.
Actually, I was joining. Sorry, I was going to join what you're going to say is that this is more of a global theme that we're seeing, is that consumers more and more want to have something that feels to them more local. So these microbreweries, which are now getting purchased by a larger group, ultimately it comes to the same. What really will separate every different companies is the segmentation, which targets these retail companies will want to sell to which different type of consumers, and these will be the companies that will very likely outperform. So now we're just back to branding, which is what you've been mentioning for the past hour. I think that is it for tonight. Before we leave, I think we have another 30-40 minutes. Please help yourself to some drinks. Come and have a chat with any of us if you have any questions.